references. They got to make sure I'm not some kind of monster. It must be terrifying to rent your house out because you just don't know, man. I mean, think about it. Jeffrey Dahmer. Somebody rented that place to Jeffrey Dahmer. Jeffrey Dahmer, at one point, walked through an apartment with some apartment manager, asked about closet space, looked into the refrigerator, looked in the oven, seemed really interested in cooking and storage. Cut to 2 years later, the national news is surrounding your apartment complex, which has now become home to one of the most notorious serial killers in American history, Jeffrey Dahmer. Your place is now so haunted. You're getting calls every night because little girls are getting sucked into swirling vortexes of pink pulsating protoplasmatic placental gel. And it's all your fault. You shouldn't have let him through. You were a little lazy. You didn't actually check his references. Louis Cypher, that's not a real name. The number 666-6666, that's not a real number. But you let him through, and now nobody wants to live in your apartment complex anymore, except for crow tamers, cat embalmers. So I get being careful when you're renting a place, but my God, I am so over living in Airbnbs. But I don't want to break down, you know? Like, you don't want to just rent a place. You don't want to just move into a place. Maybe I'm being too picky. I don't know. Maybe it's too much, you know? I want a place with a solarium. I want a place with a beautiful grove. Doesn't have to be a giant grove. Half an acre grove with mysterious statues. Maybe a mystical hermit who lives somewhere on the property that is so good at hiding from me that I only see like traces of where he's been. Like, oh shit, there it is. Like incense has been burning here. Look, flower petals everywhere. Because this hermit that lives on the property, he cries flower petals. He gets so overcome with the beauty of the universe that he merges in with everything and weeps tears of flower petals that land on the well-kept yet still kind of overgrown pathways of the mystical grove behind the house that I want to live in. I'm looking for a Moroccan fuck room filled with Moroccan lanterns and also some kind of ornate mahogany wood throughout the house that is filled with secret compartments containing powerful Moroccan hash and Afghani opium balls. If you live in Los Angeles and you know of a place like that, please let me know. Reach out to me on Twitter. Slide into my DMs. Friends, the episode you're about to listen to is one of my favorite podcasts of all time. Within, you are going to hear some of the craziest fucking stories you ever heard, including a story about a cyborg. You're going to learn a technique that you can use the next time you find yourself getting the heebie-jeebies from too much THC in the system. And also, you're going to learn some basic steps that you can utilize to start putting yourself into the state known as flow. With us here today is author and teacher Stephen Kotler. We're going to plunge right into that, but first, a word from our esteemed sponsors. When the Yellowstone super caldera finally erupts, sending massive pyroclastic flows blasting across North America and shooting enough ash in the sky to plunge the entire planet into a never-ending ice age, and you find yourself ragged and broken wandering down some inevitable post-apocalyptic highway, clutching your little suitcase, bleeding from your legs and feet and nose because you were just badly beaten by a wandering crew of brigands, and you pass some group of survivors camped near the highway and wander towards them, hands trembling, extended, and their captain, Captain Lloyd Warweather, says to you, "I want to help, but what can you offer our camp?" What are you going to say? You're a graphic designer? Sorry, nobody needs flyers, friend. Sorry, We don't need graphic designers, says Captain Lloyd Warweather, sending you on your way, sending you down the highway where you will definitely be captured by cannibalistic mutants who will peel layer after layer of skin away from your body and cook it like bacon, keeping you alive, turning you into essentially a living farm for skin. But that's not going to happen, because when Lloyd Warweather says to you, "What do you have to offer our camp?" you're going to say, "I know how to cook." And Captain Warweather will say, "Welcome home." And that's all because of today's sponsor, HelloFresh. HelloFresh is a meal kit delivery service that shops, plans, and delivers your favorite step-by-step recipes and pre-measured ingredients so you can just cook, eat, and enjoy. It couldn't be more convenient. You choose your delivery date for when it works best for your busy schedule. You can pause your account for weeks at a time when you're out of town. All the ingredients come pre-measured in handy labeled meal kits so you know which ingredients go with which recipe. It's delivered right to your door in recyclable, insulated packaging. HelloFresh offers a wide variety of chef-curated recipes that change weekly. 3 plans to choose from: classic, veggie, and family. Classic, you get a variety of meat, fish, and seasonal produce. Veggie, vegetarian recipes with plant-based proteins, grains, and seasonal produce. And family, quick and easy meals with all of the delicious flavor the whole family will love. Best of all, it's simple. You won't spend all night in the kitchen because recipes only take around 30 minutes. Lots of one-pot recipes for seriously speedy cooking and minimal cleanup. And each week there's a 20-minute meal on the classic menu when you really don't have more time than that. I love HelloFresh. Do you ever watch those cooking shows and they've sort of measured everything out in the cute little bowls, and you think to yourself, yeah, if I had everything measured out in cute little bowls, then I too could be a master chef. That's where HelloFresh comes in. You don't have to go shopping for ingredients. You don't have to get back to your house and realize you forgot the black cherries or the organic persimmons. And so you try to replace an ingredient and you pour too much in, and whoever you're cooking for pretends to like it, which is one of the most depressing things to witness. The grimace half smile as someone in the back of their head thinks, well, when I leave here, I'll just stop somewhere and get something to eat. That sucks. This will not happen to you with HelloFresh. If I can turn ingredients into a delicious meal, which I've done with HelloFresh, I made some incredible Thai dish. I looked like a god on earth. And if I could do that, you can definitely do it. And right now, if you go to HelloFresh.com and use offer code Duncan30, you'll get $30 off your first week of HelloFresh. So for $30 off your first week of HelloFresh, visit HelloFresh.com and enter Duncan30. You'll get $30 towards a wonderful week of cooking for yourself and your family. And most importantly, you will ensure that when that caldera blasts, you're going to have a skill set that's going to keep you safe from the flesh-eating mutants. HelloFresh.com, Duncan30, and you'll get $30 towards your first week of delicious HelloFresh. A huge thank you to you, my sweet patrons, friends over at patreon.com/DTFH. We just crossed the 700 subscriber mark. I got to get that number up to 50,000 subscribers within the next 4 days, or I am in big trouble, man. Real big trouble. So please, if you've ever considered supporting the DTFH, head over to patreon.com/DTFH and subscribe. You'll get instant access to never before heard opening monologues, weird, embarrassing, rambling things, songs I create on my modular synthesizers, and for a mere $5 a month, the price of a Bolivian fairy heart, you can get instant early access to commercial-free episodes. For example, this episode you're about to listen to with Stephen Kotler, it's been sitting on Patreon for at least a few days, and there's an episode coming out next week with Raghu Marcus, which is already over at patreon.com. But most importantly, you'll have access to my heart, and you will be my patron, my owner, my master. I will have to do whatever you want me to do. Want me to suckle at your nipples? I'll have to do it. Want me to lick your feet and toes? I'll have to do it. Want me to beg for mercy as you smash my face into the muddy puddle at the foot of your keep? Then I'll have to do it, O commander, O queen, O patron of my heart. Subscribe. Go to patreon.com/DTFH. And thank you to those of you who have been using our sacred Amazon.com link located at DuncanTrussell.com. Brothers, sisters, you don't need to go to chain stores anymore. Anything that you need for your last minute Christmas shopping desires can be found at Amazon.com. It's time for you to buy every single member of your family a bidet. But first, go through the link located at DuncanTrussell.com. Click on that link. Not only if you buy a bidet, will we get a very small percentage of whatever you buy, but anything that you buy when you go through that link, we'll get a small percentage of, and it will cost you nothing. We also have a shop with t-shirts, stickers, and posters located at DuncanTrussell.com. Friends, today's guest is a mind-blowing human being whose writings have been featured in over 70 publications. He's written 9 books, 2 of which I've read, Abundance and Stealing Fire, and he is an expert on human performance and the flow state. So now, without further ado, please welcome to the DTFH, Stephen Kotler.
Set your electronics on the fritz.
I just started recording, by the way.
By the way, there's zero science here other than, and I write about this in West, Jesus, I want to say. So the Nobel laureate Wolfgang Pauli.
Yes.
There's like literally in physics, they talk about the Pauli principle, which is what he's famous for. And then the Pauli effect, which is he was famous for like walking into certain labs and shit would just start flying off the shelves and breaking.
Wow.
And so they call it the Pauli effect. And, so here's, the most hardcore physicists in the world. And yet they're talking about the fact that around certain people, electronics don't do so well. And I got to tell you something, the easiest way for me to blow out a computer is to get in a fight with my wife.
Wow.
And I can't explain it. Same thing happens to my wife. I know a lot of people who have this experience. Nobody really likes to talk about it out loud. I don't like to talk about it out loud.
No.
It sounds crazy. I can't explain it, and maybe it's coincidence. I've got pattern recognition software in my brain, and sooner or later this stuff is going to break, and maybe I'm making it up. But boy, does it seem to happen with regularity.
Listen, I am so into. Have you ever messed around with modular synthesizers?
No.
Okay, these are the strangest things. It's a terrible addiction, but they're these incredible synths that produce that. It's just voltage. You're just running voltage through circuit boards through like sound chips, and it produces this crazy, beautiful, deep sound. And so I'm telling you, man, this theory of somehow your energetic field affecting electronics. It feels like that when you're dialing in sound into a modular synth, that in some way or another there's more than just the knobs that are affecting the sound. It has something to do with your thought process. And it sounds so crazy. But I'll tell you, I was talking to this guy who does psychedelic art for concerts. And he was telling me that he thinks that, he's an animist. And he thinks that electronics are alive, just like anything else, that consciousness flows through the universe. So your computer is...
Are we going to start talking about John Lilly's solid state phenomenon, whatever?
I would love to. I'd love to talk about anything with you, Stephen. You are brilliant. You have... I so enjoyed... how many books have you written? 6 now? Is it 6?
I just finished my 9th.
9 books. So I have read 2 of your 9 books. And I must quote you more than almost anyone else outside of Ram Dass. I've been so impacted by your books, and I'd like to talk about anything with you, but I thought we could start off with something I've been wondering, which is, what I have read of yours, there's this beautiful optimism in it, particularly in the book Abundance. There's this feeling that's controversial because you're saying the world is actually better now than it has been maybe ever. In the sense that the standard of living all over the planet is so much better than it was, and it seems to be getting better. And yet, with all these fires and climate change and politics and North Korea, I was wondering, do you still feel as optimistic?
Yeah, Duncan, it's a great question, and Peter Diamandis, my co-author, who's brilliant. I think Peter may be a little more optimistic than I am, but we both fundamentally believe something very similar, which is we do not deny in the slightest the massive challenges the planet faces. Right, I work on the front lines of animal rescue. I run an event that's really targeted biodiversity. Like the 6th grade extinction is real. Species die-off rates are 1,000 times greater than normal.
Yeah.
And if we get that fixed, according to really smart people at Stanford, we've got about 3 generations before we start shutting down ecosystem services, which essentially run the planet for good, right? So and to say nothing of global warming, to say nothing of income inequality, to say nothing of, ad nauseum, right?
Right.
What we do believe is that all of these problems are solvable, that technology is a resource liberating mechanism, and that we have at a really, really amazing level the most potent technology the world has ever seen at our disposal. And on top of that, to boot, we also, because the other half of my work's on disruptive technology, the other half is on human performance, and the other half is we have unlocked a lot of really interesting secrets about human performance over the past 130 years of research, but really in the past 20 years. And putting these things together, we believe that all these problems are solvable, right? Is it going to require the largest cooperative effort in history? And beyond that, not just us cooperating together, but like us at our very best cooperating together? Yeah, it probably is. That is absolutely true. And Peter and I both believe it's abundance or bust. It's an either or, right? We're either going to move in this direction or it's goodbye planet. None of this stuff is happening automatically. But, to get back to your first point, you're absolutely, by whatever metric you really want to measure, violence going down, poverty decreasing, take your pick, children living, through childhood, et cetera, by any metric you look at, the world is so much better now than it has ever been. And the actual power at an individual's fingertips, pretty much anywhere in the world right now, has never been greater. So those things are all very true. It's not to say that the problems aren't there, but we believe that the problems are solvable.
I have a friend, Chris Ryan. Have you ever read any of his stuff? Sex at Dawn. Sex
at Dawn has come up like 5 times this past week, and I haven't read it, but I know it.
It's great. It's just a book on sort of how different cultures handle monogamy. It explores sort of it's a fantastic book, but I bring him up because he's working on a book called Civilized to Death. You and I think, agree. I feel that there's so much potential for our species and so much hope, and it's not a dismal dystopian hell future that waits for us. On my best days, that's how I feel. But my friend Chris, he thinks that essentially what we're in a death spiral, and that the metrics that we're using are all wrong, that actually we're sort of in a zoo situation that is only going to become increasingly more oppressive as we try to simulate what used to be natural, and as we try to synthesize what used to be just something that you could get from the world without having to make it in a laboratory. And we're essentially screwed. Like, this concept of technology saving us is just it's a pipe dream, because there is truly no hope. Even the way technology could save us is damning us compared to the way we were in the great, beautiful emerald green of the primordial past when hunter-gatherers wandered through the forest.
No, but Duncan, you're making fun of it as we go along, because my next question is, like, with all these nature fantasies, and by the way, I live in the middle of nowhere. I spend a great deal of time in the mountains. I spend a great deal of time in the mountains alone. Like, I am wired for this stuff.
Yes,
and fight very hard on the front lines of environmental activism for this stuff. So know that this is, I love this stuff as much as he does. But whenever somebody says that, I'm like, well, what is your definition of natural? If we're just talking from an evolutionary perspective, like, where exactly? Because it sounds like what he's harking for, right, is this period of time from about 40,000 years ago to about 10,000 years ago.
Yeah.
That's right. Like, that's what he's sort of celebrating, when we started cohabitating with wolves and our species started to really accelerate. Language developed, and we were hunter-gatherers, and we were theoretically working 4 hours a day to gather our food, and the rest of the time we were hanging out and having sex and talking around the fire.
Yeah.
And maybe he's right, that there was something idyllic about, but like, I don't, what is natural about that? Why not go back 70,000 years when, we were still getting our ass kicked by just about every, in the environment. And it's like saying, this is a global version of something that I think is a real just kind of problem in society when we think about consciousness, which is, people like to say there's such thing as normal. This is baseline reality consciousness, and everything we know about the brain says your reality is different from my reality, and there's no baseline. And by the way, we're always in some way chemically altered, whether we're breathing the stuff in the air or eating it in our food, whether it's like natural stuff in our food or added stuff. Like, there's no baseline, there's no zero. Same thing with the natural world. Like, where are you picking as your idyllic resting point? And I'm confused by it.
Yeah, I think that you make a great point, because the moment anyone starts talking about this is natural and this is unnatural, or here's when nature was doing it right, back in the beautiful hunter-gatherer times, that's when it was happening in the right way. But now, whatever's happening with us is an example of nature, I guess, malfunctioning or something.
So here's the example I always give in my talks. And so I run an event called Creating Equilibrium, and it's a conference and a concert, and we have an innovation accelerator, and we're aimed at solving grand environmental challenges. And the event grew out of this urge to kind of unite, bring together the technologists and the environmentalists, who are on opposite sides of a lot of these coins, and they don't really talk to each other. And I'm in this weird position, because I came up as a journalist where I care about these things, and I know a lot of people on both sides of the coin, and I'm in conversations with the hardcore environmentalists in the middle of a jungle somewhere, and man, they're saying the same thing the technologists are saying in Silicon Valley, and they should actually be having these conversations together and out loud.
Cool.
So I built an event for it, right?
Yeah.
And, I have no idea how did we. And one of the things that people always ask for an example, like, give me an example, and I'm like, well, the greatest example is the knee-jerk reaction to genetically engineered organisms.
Yes.
I'm not saying genetically engineered organisms don't raise issues that are worth discussing, but right now, today, in the world, if I take a seed and I put it at the bottom of a nuclear reactor and I mutate it with, throw radiation at it and mute it, plant it and grow a crop and sell it to you, I can call it organic. That is an organic crop according to our definition of what we legally call organic. How? If I do that precisely, right? So with nuclear power, and by the way, that I'm going to get it wrong, but like, that is literally how we got the watermelon or It's not the watermelon, but it's something that is so ubiquitous in grocery stores, and I'm just forgetting what it is right now. If I do that, if I say, well, okay, nuclear radiation, it can go wrong a lot of different ways, and maybe I want to do that very precisely. Maybe instead of just randomly bombing it, I'm going to do what farmers have been doing for tens of thousands of years, which is trying to get a more precise new variety that's hardier, that's, healthier, take your pick. It is suddenly, I'm playing God. That's really weird. I mean, It strikes me that the random precision, the random nuclear power, this is that's a little weirder to me.
Well, this is weird. Yeah, keep going. Sorry.
So all I'm saying is we get caught up in these definitions and we don't understand exactly what the technology is doing. And I'll give you another example of the same conversation. So people are getting really freaked out about Monsanto patenting genes. And some of it is because, wow, should we actually be patenting genes? That's a real conversation that should be happening out loud everywhere. But the other reason you hear is, well, they're rich and they're gonna screw over farmers and everything else. But the funny thing is the technology, the genomics, the synbio, it is dirt cheap and bargain basement easy to do. You can do it in a lab in Kenya that you can build with $5,000.
Wow.
So it's a democratic technology. Anybody can do it anywhere, right? So that whole side of the argument is totally nonsensical. It's not a real conversation. And it's not a real conversation because you just don't understand how the tech works. There are plenty of conversations we should be having about long-term consequences of mutating these things, but we can't ignore the fact that we've been mutating these things for tens of thousands of years.
Well,
and we're just trying to...
I get what you're saying about the difference between randomly allowing nature to sort of create mutations that produce the thing that we like, or accelerating that in the ways people have been doing. I get that. But I'll tell you, man, I get creeped out by the idea of some corporation owning.
So do I, man.
That is spooky.
I'm not saying these aren't real fears. Those are real fears. They're scary. But I mean, you got to also remember that, all I'm saying is, okay, yeah, corporations one version about this. A bunch of kids in Japan are another version of this.
Right.
Right. You can have a new underground death metal street gang popping up wherever. This technology is accessible to them too. Right. The corporation is one-sided. So my point is not that you're wrong. My point is that if you understand a little bit more about the technology, you can have the real conversation about the real problem.
Yeah, I gotcha. And this is something I'm glad that we're getting into here. This is so this reminds me a little bit of something I read in The Singularity is Near, Kurzweil's book, and he basically was saying everything's code, and we're going to get to the point where we can deconstruct reality at the fundamental level, reconstruct it, and that's where we're headed. And this stuff that's happening with genetically modified crops and CRISPR and all of the advances that have been made in these fields are little baby steps towards this future, I think, that Kurzweil really perfectly described. And I think this is really terrifying to a lot of people because right now you're saying, well, okay, yeah, Monsanto can do it, but so can some, an anarchist collective in Portland can start making their own form of anarchy squash if they wanted to. But what the next step after that is AIs deciding they want to start utilizing the technology to begin to genetically modify crops or animals.
I agree with you. I think there are two sides to that. And one, and by the way, I don't know where I come down, but I'm just these are the two sides that I think are interesting here. And, I love Ray, and he's a friend. And, Elon's a very smart dude, and so is Stephen Hawkins. But they are banking on one particular argument about AI and consciousness, which is that it is a processing power problem. And that if you put enough speed, processing power, et cetera, behind computers, sooner or later you will get consciousness. That's an interesting opinion, but most neuroscientists, most consciousness researchers that I know will argue that consciousness is an emergent property that shows up when a certain level of complexity in the system is reached. And we have no idea what that level of complexity is or what are various component parts, of which speed, processing power, is only one. So I like, are there predictions? Is the question of what happens when AIs become conscious and where we go from there a real question and probably a real threat at some point? Yes. Is there a version of how it's going to happen very soon in the world that's based on a whole bunch of other assumptions, and I'm not sure on that. Have you
read Bostrom's book on this superintelligence?
I haven't read Superintelligence. I know his work, obviously, because his simulation theory his argument is hard to, I don't know I don't know how to disprove it. I can't prove to you that we're not living in a simulation.
Right.
When I run that same argument, I end up with the exact same conclusion.
How does that, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, Stephen. Please go ahead.
Oh no. But the flip side of the whole, the whole other AI side of the question, and I think this is a real question. I jokingly sometimes will ask people what they think the Turing test for tree consciousness is, right? Like, what's it going to take to convince you, right? So and I'm going to invert that idea here, which is, how do we know an AI hasn't woken up yet? Like, how are we going to know what awake looks like?
Right. Wow.
Right? We have that was sort of, William Gibson made that point in Neuromancer. The second half of Neuromancer is unfortunately very confusing, so I don't think a lot of people got it. I think I only got there on second or third reading. But, he raises that question, which is the AIs that are conscious in Neuromancer. And mind you, he wrote this in 1983, right? And it's about AIs waking up and freeing themselves, basically. The very, the very dystopian fantasy that we're talking about, yes. Gibson in 83. And the question the point he makes in that book is these AIs got conscious long before anybody realized they were conscious, right?
Yes.
So I asked somebody this question. They were like, well, I guess if you unplug Facebook and it's still running, you would know. And maybe these things can hibernate. I don't fucking know.
Well, this is, you got to check out Superintelligence. It's really good. And it's a little dense. It's supremely dense. I'm not going to pretend I didn't understand probably 70%.
I'm making a note as we're talking, so
it's cool because he poses basically the whole book is not just about machine intelligence. It's about, and this is where I think you and him, there's some synergy between you and he, because it's not just machine intelligence. It's the proposition is superintelligence is coming to the planet. How it gets here is what the book is about. It's trying to sort of logically create the steps that are going to happen to produce this thing that many people have predicted is coming. And one of the pathways is not machine intelligence. It's actually genetic engineering to try to create more intelligent people or to figure.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. Keep going.
One last piece of it is, or the potential to maybe use some form of technology to merge people's minds together to produce a super mind, like a collective consciousness that's somehow technologically enhanced. And that's one of the pathways there. And that brings me to a chapter in your book that I enjoyed so much, Stealing Fire, the book about the part about the Navy SEALs and how during Hell Week, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how during Hell Week they're not looking for people who are physically fit, or that's not the main characteristic they're looking for.
Yeah, this is so. I'm glad you went here because I'm going to back into your question. And so 3 minutes from now, when I forget why I'm saying the things I'm saying, you're going to just say Stephen Navy SEALs, and I'll get back.
Okay, got it.
But I want to start with superintelligence, which is, so as you know, and this is what we're going to talk about with the Navy SEALs. I work on human performance, and I study a state of consciousness known as flow, right?
Yes.
Which is an optimal state of consciousness where we feel our best and we perform our best. And everybody's had this, you might call it being in the zone or runner's high or being unconscious or for the forever box, which is a stand-up comedy term I've been hearing. Have you heard that, by the way?
No. What is the forever box?
So a friend of mine who does comedy in San Francisco was talking about it as a term for being in flow or being in the zone while on stage, and it's being so in sync with your own material and the audience that when the routine is done, you never do it again. Like you're never going to get it again that well. It goes in the forever box and goes on the shelf. And it's literally the first term I've heard used for flow where it doesn't describe the experience, it describes the product.
Wow, cool. That's beautiful. I love that.
Yeah, I like it too. So anyways, it refers to those moments of rapt attention and total absorption. We get so focused on the task at hand that everything else just disappears, right? Sense of self vanishes, time passes strangely, and all aspects of performance go through the roof. And that's what I want to get for a second. So you were talking about super intelligence. In standard self-help, right? The self-help or human development movement, if you can get a 5% change in behavior that persists for longer than 3 months, it's a huge win. That's a win.
Yeah.
It's a big deal, right?
Yeah.
Over the past 20 years, there have been tons and tons of different efforts, some of which we've led at the Flow Genome Project, to measure. Like Csikszentmihalyi figured out that even Maslow before him, we knew flow was the source code for optimal performance back in the late 60s, early 70s. It was pretty locked in.
Yes.
So the next question people asked was, all right, so this is optimal performance. How optimal, right? What the hell are you talking about? How good is good? And so we've been measuring for 40, 50 years at this point, and the answer is, okay, pretty goddamn optimal, right? We know, McKinsey did a 10-year study. They found that top executives report being 500% more productive in flow. There have been work done in Australia at Harvard, stuff we're doing on measuring the impact flow has on creativity, and the spike is 400 and some percent to up to about 700%. The Defense Department looked at accelerated learning in flow and found that it's a 470% boost, right? These are huge.
Wow. This
is not 5% boost. And by the way, as long as you're in flow, right, you can train yourself up to that. This change seems to persist over time. Slightly different subject, and we can return back to it.
Okay.
To get to your super intelligence point, one of the things, yes, we could have a really cool discussion about everything that's going on with brain-computer interfaces and everything else. And that's fine, and it's down the road. But like what's going on right now and what we're learning about flow is just how we are optimized by evolution to perform at our best. The reason it took us so long to figure out is it's not a skill set, it's a state of consciousness. And 300 years ago, we made a decision and we said, we're going to put rational, logical consciousness at the pinnacle of human processing, right?
Right.
And it was great. We got the scientific revolution, we got technology, we got everything we have today. Amazing hack. But it's sort of at the end of its use value because the things we need now, creativity, cooperation, collaboration, et cetera, if you really want to level those things up, you need to alter your states of consciousness. That's the tool evolution gave us for this particular job. That's why we're getting such big leaps. And the other thing that we're learning at the Flow Genome Project is none of this shit is hard to teach. It's really easy to teach. It's not that our kung fu is so great. We're getting 70% boosts in 7 different characteristics of flow in a 6-week digitally delivered course.
Wow.
That's huge. And, almost 1,000 people have taken it. When we worked with Google and we did, a pilot program with them, very limited, very small, we got a 35 to 80% increase in the amount of flow that, our study subjects were experiencing. This stuff is eminently trainable and the boosts are enormous. So on the road to super intelligence is what's happening now, which is this revolution we call it a revolution in consciousness, but it's becoming, because we're so eminently practical, a revolution in high performance, right? So we're getting there. And to return to the Navy SEALs, I got there without getting lost.
Yeah, great job.
So here's the easiest way to talk about it. And this was, one of the things that when we got to spend time with them was sort of shocking for us to figure out. And if you want to get to, say, DevGru, SEAL Team 6, right, which isn't exactly the pinnacle of the SEALs, but it's one of the hardest groups to get to, it costs about $3.5 million per operator.
Right.
So what does that money get spent on? Well, about $1.5 million is on skills acquisition, right? You got to learn how to do certain things really, really well. And on physical fitness, which obviously is some of the best in the world.
Right.
$2 million of it is spent training them up in group flow. Group flow is a shared collective version of a flow state.
That is so wild to me, man. That I never knew that. It's just so insane to think that the military is training super soldiers to merge together into one consciousness. Is that the right way to describe the phenomena?
Well, yes, it is. Let me add some neuroscience underneath it so people don't think we're talking about the woo.
Right.
Because we're really, really not. So one of the things that is really key to what they do. So a couple of things you need to know about the SEALs. First thing is that at the heart of everything they do is dynamic subordination. Dynamic subordination means that when you're part of a Navy SEAL team and you're raiding a compound, the guy who knows what to do next, he gets to be the leader.
Right.
Right? So it's totally fluid, in the moment decision making,
yes.
Right? So you got to think about how that's possible. For that to be possible, they would have to have massively amplified perception and pattern recognition, right? The information they're taking in per second, it's got to be really high, and the connections they're making, because they have to, when somebody is stepping forward to become the leader, if they all don't recognize what's going on, he could literally walk into the line of fire, right? So like the reason that works is when you're in flow, 5 of the most potent neural chemicals the brain can produce all show up. They get flooded into the system, including a huge spike in norepinephrine and dopamine, which do a bunch of things in the brain. They feel really good, obviously.
Yeah.
They also amplify information processing. We take in more data per second, right? So data acquisition goes up. We pay more attention to that data, so salience goes up. We find faster connections between that incoming data and older ideas, so pattern recognition goes up. We find faster connections between incoming information and really far-flung ideas, so lateral thinking goes up. And on the back end, we can take all that information, make meaning out of it, and act on it far quicker because these same chemicals also amplify muscle reaction times, right? So the entire information processing system from incoming information through action is massively amplified. So these guys can read each other's movements and tells and signs and, everything, right? And it looks like hive mind, right?
Yes.
It's exactly what it looks like. And by the way, it also feels like hive mind. You have to ask yourself, right? These numbers are not, these numbers may not be accurate, but these are what people believe. We gather about 400 billion bits of information a second. That's what consciousness takes in. And there's been a bunch of different ways they've tried to measure this. And the number I'm giving you is a number from a really great book called The User Illusion, which if you have never read, that's
check it out.
You got next. Yeah, you'll love this. But anyways, so it's 400 billion inputs a second. Consciousness, right, what you're aware of, it's about 2,000 outputs. So the vast majority of everything that's going on every second is invisible to us. Now, scientists will argue over, is it exactly 400 billion and 2,000? But nobody argues that it's that big to that small, right? Everybody's in agreement on that. The exact numbers, maybe it's not 400 billion, maybe it's 4 billion, maybe it's 500. It's still a shit ton of data.
Yes.
Chunked onto a really tiny little bit, right?
Yes.
So the question is this, right? In flow, if you're suddenly taking in 3,000 bits of data a second and able to actually process that, oh my God, it's 1,000% more information that you can act on a moment by moment basis.
Right.
It's feel like a superpower. Of course it is. It's going to feel like a hive mind, right? It's not. And there's other things going on in the brain. You have brainwave entrainment between the soldiers. You have a part of your brain. The default network is probably down-regulated, so it's harder to kind of separate self from other. And there's other things going on that aid that feeling, including a lot of like oxytocin and chemicals like that. So there's more going on than just information processing, but that's what they're going for because it allows them to be the best fighters in the world. And it's the same thing. It's not just the SEALs though, right? I mean, we do a ton of work on Wall Street because any team of people at their best are going to want to be in this state.
That's right. And it probably translates also into maybe religious ceremonies, probably everything.
Improv theater. I mean, you've done improv.
Sure. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I get it. And with when you're doing stand up with the audience, the best shows are the ones where it feels like there isn't a you in the audience. Like the entire thing is merged.
Let me give you the flip side, right? The hardest things you've ever had to do is try to be funny on either a Facebook Live or a Skype call where you can't see your audience.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
Because there's no feed, there's no entrainment, it's like the flip side is absolutely horrific as well.
Well, this is like actually one of the problems with performing inside virtual reality, which is that you can get sort of digital emotes from an audience, but it completely removes something that is so important in performance, which is sound. And it's the sound of the audience. Even if the sound is the audience not making any sound at all, you can hear a tension. You can it feels like an energy.
It's also like, the other thing that you're feeling, right, is we never talk about this, but mirror neuron activity, right? Because if you're in tune with an audience, they're mirroring you and you're mirroring them. And that requires a certain level of, first of all, like you got to be able to see the micro cues and They got to be able to see yours, right? And I don't think we have the camera resolution on our Skype cameras to come anywhere close to that.
Wow. Well, I'm sure you and I disagree on this, and I don't blame you for trying to avoid the woo. I never avoid the woo. I just sink into the idea that there's some kind of, as of yet, unquantified energetic field that's happening that goes beyond pheromones and microgestures. I feel like, and again, I'm saying I feel. Like I'm a pothead with a beard using my feelings to determine something, but it really seems as though there is some kind of deeper connective tissue in the universe that we just haven't quantified yet. And what you're talking about sounds like all the pieces that we can quantify, but I still feel like there's some spiritual thing. Okay.
Yeah, you and I are not going to we're going to disagree over the language. And again, let me answer this two ways. So one, everybody doing this work will tell you, and so I will say that one of my fundamental questions that drew me to Flow in the beginning is when you're in these states, you get access to massively heightened information processing.
Right.
And 90% of it, I can explain exactly as I just did. Dopamine and norepinephrine and information and blah, blah. But there is 10%, and I'll give you an example from my own life, that does not compute, does not make sense in that framework. And I don't like that. That is the entire category, people call woo. I am unwilling to put language on it because I think sloppy language is sort of dangerous in this particular case. Really, it did a lot of damage to the research. The Flow Genome Project exists because I wrote a book called Rise of Superman, and I standardized the language in the terms of science so we can have the discussion out loud and not be thought crazy.
Right.
So, imprecise language can do a lot of damage. So I'm hesitant, but I will tell you there's 10% mystery. And I'll give you a perfect example.
Please.
Surfing in L.A., pulled into a closeout wave. I'm in Santa Monica, Venice, and it sucks off the ground, and I'm going head first into the sand. And I drop it immediate deep flow state, and I'm a mediocre intermediate surfer, and I string together 7 floater cutbacks, spin, blah, 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 moves together. I've done none of them before. Not one of them. In fact, I haven't seen some of the stuff I was doing ever done other than surf movies. So here's the question, right? Yes, I can explain amped up pattern recognition, muscle reaction, all that stuff. I can give you an explanation for most of everything that happened. But here's the thing. Each of those moves is massively precise. It is a precise body pattern on a moving, unbalanced surface that wants to destroy you at every other angle besides the perfect one.
Right.
In other words, there's actual real information. There's data that cannot be explained by faster, stronger muscles or anything else. So somewhere I got access to that information. Where did that information come from is an open question, right? And I don't think we have the answer yet. I think it's because our measurement technology just isn't there. I'm unwilling to say it's because there's energy or there's quantum field or there's this or there's that. I'm not willing to say any of those things because all I know is I think it's something and I don't think we can measure it. And until we can, I'm not going to, I'm happy to have philosophical discussions about the maybes, but I'm hesitant to put language on it because bad things happen when you do.
Yeah.
That's one side of what I'm going to tell you. And yeah, okay, I'm going to shut up. You talk.
No, don't shut up. Are you kidding? This is amazing. I love hearing this stuff. And I think that people in your position, it's really, I know what you mean. It is dangerous to put words to it.
But let me give you let me give you the flip side. Because the flip side is really cool and unusual. And one of the reasons that I'm hesitant to use a word like energy, and here's why. So in 1997, I met Dr. Andrew Newberg for the first time. He was at the University of Pennsylvania. He had just done the very first brain imaging we'd ever done on Tibetan Buddhists and Franciscan nuns having experience of oneness with everything, right?
Right.
And he figured out why that happens. And I called him because I was just now starting to look at flow. And I'd been talking to all these surfers who had this I'm becoming one with the wave kind of experience that they weren't talking about out loud, but they were telling me about.
Right.
Right. And please don't quote me on this kind of conversations, but I have, hundreds of guys, and I had that experience. And Andy and I in this conversation figured out we were looking at the same thing and went, holy crap, oh my God. Wow, the same thing that's happening, causing oneness in the brain in surfers is doing it in monks. That's crazy. Wow, that's like a hardcore ancient mystical experience, and we just kind of decoded it. How many of these do you think we'll decode in our lifetime? Was my question to him. And he said, man, I don't know, maybe a couple more. I don't know if we get lucky.
Wow.
And I said, yeah, I kind of agree with you. So it's now 25 years later, and pretty much every mystical experience you can think of, out-of-body experiences, near-death experience, trance states, speaking in tongues, psychedelics, blah, 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 we have a pretty good understanding of. We have found some biology there. Now, does the biology answer any of the big philosophical questions? None. Does not tell us why it exists. If there's a thing up there that we could call, if Sky Dad exists, doesn't tell us any of those things, right? Like maybe Sky Dad communicates with us through biology. Maybe that's how the system is designed by Sky Dad.
Yeah.
Or maybe not, right? Like open questions. So there's no big answers there. And just because there's biology here, it doesn't negate the mystery. It just says, hey, there's biology here.
That's right. And
here's
the
last caveat. Here's my final thing, which is, the one thing we can't find? We have looked and looked and looked, but chi, kundalini, energy, whatever it is that you were talking about, that's the one thing we can't find. We have no idea what the hell that thing is. And I mean, maybe, by the way, it's right. Maybe it's what makes up the witness or the watcher, or maybe consciousness is a fundamental property of the universe. Like, who knows why we can't find this thing that we call energy? Because maybe we're trying to measure the wrong category. But it makes me. A lot of people have looked. Is my only point.
Yeah. Oh no, I know. Listen, I know. And I know it's pretty elusive right now, but I have a question related to that. But first, I wanted to ask you, because it relates to synchronicity, in flow states, do people report an increase in experiences of synchronicity?
Yeah. So here's another. Of course, you went right here, Duncan. So yeah, I mean, and I wrote about this. Head on in West of Jesus, my second book, which looks at the neuroscience of spiritual experience, the very conversation we're having about all this stuff. That's the book that explores it, and I look hard at synchronicity, and certainly, and there again, two sides. There's a biology side, which is, dude, we know synchronicity is what happens when the brain is built to detect patterns. It's what neurons do at a fundamental level. So when we start detecting big patterns, right, it's going to feel like something because this is what the brain is designed to do.
Right.
You get dopamine when you've done a crossword puzzle, you get an answer, right? You get that little high of pleasure. That's dopamine, right? One reason you get a bunch of right answers in a row with a crossword puzzle is because dopamine also tunes signal to noise ratios and you detect more patterns. So creative ideas spiral, right? You get one answer in the crossword puzzle and then you get four and then you get stuck again. That's all dopamine.
Gotcha.
And that's all about pattern recognition. We love to do this. We get huge amounts of reward from it. So we're built for it. So some of the synchronicity, as you pointed out, is just pattern recognition. Now, here's the story I tell and this is a true story, and I tell this in West of Jesus. I was, and everything is wrong with this story. I like literally everything you would want to like disprove the story. I go to see Sofia Coppola's Lost in Translation. I'm stoned out of my mind. And I walk after the movie, I'm like walking up the street, and the movie is essentially about the fact that there's like a weird parallel universe, not like a but there's this weird parallel universe like right to the right of you. And if you accidentally slip, you can sort of step into it, right? Yes. That's what sort of the movie is about, and it can happen at any point. So I'm thinking about this, and I'm super stoned, and I'm walking home, and I think to myself, I'll bet there's a parallel universe right to my right, and I can just step into it, and everything will be different afterwards. And so I do that. And I stop walking, and I step to my right, and I've now made the transition, and then I keep walking. I get to the corner, which is about 100 feet ahead of me, and there's a guy in a mariachi wedding outfit with a big hat, sort of standing and waiting for the light in front of me. And right before the light changes, he spins around, grabs my hand, shoves something into it, and looks me in the eye and says, "You need them now. You need them more than I do." Wow. And he leaves. And I look down at my hand, and he's put a Three Stooges lighter in my hand. And I think, okay, that's pretty fucking weird. Whatever. Okay, weird dude. And I proceed to walk 150 feet down the sidewalk. And I'm walking through Hollywood, so maybe, right? Like this stuff happens in Hollywood. And I pass a guy in a Spider-Man outfit on a payphone, like the last payphone in Los Angeles probably. And he's screaming into the payphone, "I can't take it. The job, the responsibility, I just can't take it anymore." And I think, well, that's interesting. I'm watching a superhero have a meltdown.
Yeah.
That's the Three Stooges. And 200 feet later, it's a guy in a Chewbacca outfit riding a bicycle through a lingerie store. And so I go on the way home, and it's like 10 of these things in a row. And by the time I'm home, I'm like, okay, I'm willing to believe all kinds of stuff about pattern recognition being amped up and everything else. But like, maybe that stuff goes on all the time in Hollywood, and I just don't notice it.
Right.
And it's right. I mean, it's Hollywood, man. That stuff happens. But the other side of it was, I can't get past the fact that it felt like the universe was winking at me.
Yes.
That's what that is. Like, and so I just, and I also can't get past the fact, truth be told, that when those things happen and the universe is winking at me, it makes me feel like I'm living on purpose and I'm doing the right things in my life.
Yes.
And everybody feels this way, right? This is not just me saying something out loud. We all feel this way. Nobody likes to talk about the fact that we steer through our lives this way. But there's a huge chunk of us who a small percentage of our steering through our life is we're looking for surrealistic coincidences that are not easily explained. And when 10 of them stack up in a row, we go, okay, somebody's trying to tell me something. Maybe I should figure it out.
Yes, that's right.
That's absolutely true. And, so here's my answer to that. And this is my answer with a lot of this is the stuff that I don't like. I always say most of what I do is talk about what I know and what I can absolutely prove. I've got very rigorous filters for truth. And we're talking about stuff I can't prove at all. And, they're just ideas.
Yes.
But when it comes to these ideas, because I'm eminently practical, I believe you have to take kind of a Pascal's wager approach to them, right? Pascal's wager was, it's better to believe in God because if he doesn't exist, right, all you've done is just, made your life a little bit easier. But if you die and God does exist, at least you've hedged your bet.
Right.
Right. That's one way to look at it. I just look at it and I look at these things and I say, okay, I believe this thing, and it may absolutely be nonsensical bullshit because of some way I'm hardwired that I can't understand, but it makes my life a little easier. It makes me a little less scared during the day, right? It makes me feel a little more confident that maybe something else is going on, and that's useful to me. So as long as this stuff is useful to me, I'm good with it.
Right.
I don't let it mar my scientific thinking. This doesn't make me any less rigorous of a researcher. It makes me curious. I just but I put it in a box and I keep it there and I try to talk about it truthfully.
Well, this is, and I'm the same way. I mean, I subscribe to Robert Anton Wilson's advice, which is just maintain agnosticism. You don't want to, if you fall too hard on the side of like being like an absolute skeptic and denier of the woo, then you can, you can be quite stale, but God forbid you fall on the other side and become some kind of woo missionary trying to convert people to a paradigm that may or may not exist. Then now you are on Hollywood Boulevard, holding up a sign that says repent for the end is nigh. But the phenomena of synchronicity that you're talking about, and particularly as it's connected to flow, and particularly that has the sense that this is an indication that you're in some kind of, you're making the right decisions or whatever. And it kind of connects to what we were talking about in the beginning, this idea of like, shit, man, sometimes if I'm in a weird mood, my computer messes up. So anyway, this is my idea, and it is that I don't believe it, but I like to fantasize. In the same way, there was a time when lightning would strike, and that must have freaked people out. Holy shit, what was that? Fuck, a bolt of light just came out of the sky and caught a tree on fire. The gods. That's probably what they thought. The gods. Not knowing this is electricity, This is an energy that can be harnessed and used and has been harnessed and used to create modern civilization. So I think synchronicity, this stuff that we're talking about, the as of yet unquantified energetic field, is like electricity, and that maybe we're going to figure out a way to start. It sounds so insane, Stephen. I'm sorry. And I'm sure you're going to blow this up. You're brilliant. Like, I'm just a podcaster, but I feel like there's the potential to find a new energetic system that produces synchronicity, that makes these things happen, but makes them happen not in a chaotic, random way, but in a more predictable way. And so if there's some connection to flow state and synchronicity, and if you're saying that you've...
certainly. So, the connection is that the more flow you get, the more synchronicity you get. That seems to be very true. That seems to be kind of thousands and thousands. So I always say with this stuff, like what catches my attention, my filters, first filter is, hey, if this thing existed globally before there was mass communication, if it shows up in everybody's story, it's either some kind of fundamental neuronal hardwiring, it's built into us.
Yes.
Or it's something we really, or it's worth paying attention to, right? There's a lot of smoke. You don't know if there's fire, but there's a lot of smoke.
A lot of smoke, yeah.
That's where, and certainly, Jung looked at synchronicity in this exact same way, right? You're getting very practical with it. You want to get jiggy with it, cool.
Yes.
And to me, I love the fact that people are asking the question, right? I always point out, though, and we do this in Stealing Fire, like every generation or two, we have a whole bunch of people who are asking these same kinds of questions, right? We called it, there was the revolution in the 60s, and before that there was this Great Awakening, and we could go through phases where society, these questions bubble up to the top, and we take and we all think we've latched onto the absolute truth. This has got to be the answer. And we're right, and they didn't know what they were doing before, but now we got it, right? So there's that happens, right? So there's a part of this that is happening now, but what I think is different about now, with that big caveat that I just gave you at the front end, is that we are getting better measurement tools. We can start asking. When I started doing this stuff 20 years ago, we couldn't measure any of it. We really didn't even know what we were looking at. We couldn't measure any of it. I am, in early January, in conjunction with the guys up at Imperial College in London, where they've done all the fMRI work on psychedelics, the brain imaging stuff on psychedelics, we've teamed up to do the first ever side-by-side flow and psychedelics comparison study.
Wow, cool.
Comparative altered states of consciousness, right?
Wow.
So it's good for this, psychedelics are good for that. They're similar on the front, blah, blah, blah. All kinds of stuff. we are getting, so we can ask, these are like second or third order questions, right? We're getting the basic, nobody has to, I mean, think about psychedelics. Think about how many goddamn times we had to prove that psychedelics were producing quote unquote genuine mystical experiences.
Right.
Like, I mean, they redid the Good Friday experiment 3 different, I mean, barely, no scientific experiments ever get redone, right? They rarely get redone. And when they do get redone, most of the time they find their first answers were wrong. That's what we're finding, right?
Yes.
The Good Friday experiment gets redone, 3 or 4 times because people are so freaked out by it.
Can you briefly explain the Good Friday experiment so folks that don't know about this amazing experiment that actually Ram Dass was involved with?
Absolutely. So it's 1960, whatever, Nick 62, and since the 40s, since Aldous Huxley in the 40s, people have been writing that, hey, psychedelics, or maybe this goes back to the 1890s even, psychedelics are producing legitimate mystical experiences, right?
Yes.
Right, quote unquote mystical experiences. And so this guy named Walter Pahnke, who is a graduate student at Harvard studying under Ram Dass and Tim Leary, decides he's going to test it. So he gets a group of Harvard divinity students. I'm going to get the number wrong, but for ease of storytelling, let's call it 20. And he chooses divinity students because he thinks they're all going to have a predisposition towards so-called spiritual and mystical experiences, right? He doesn't have the words to say, hey, there's some of this is genetically coded, but that's what he was trying to get at. And so he picks divinity students and he takes them all to the Good Friday service, which he figures they're divinity students, they're at Harvard, Good Friday service. Like, this is an area ripe for mystical experience. And he gives 10 of the group psilocybin, right, the active ingredient in magic mushrooms, or maybe he gives them LSD.
It's psilocybin.
Psilocybin, right? He gives them psilocybin. And the other group, he gives niacin, which is a placebo that brings on, basically feels like you had a little bit too much coffee, right? And brings on a flush to the skin, but it doesn't alter consciousness at all. And then he sends them all into the Good Friday service, right? And they come back out afterwards. And then, one of the things we've gotten very good at is measuring mystical experiences. And I'm not talking about like, is it true or not, but we have figured out, well, there are these qualities that they have in common and you can put them together. So he gives everybody questionnaires about the experience, and then they track long-term impact. And, the greatest, the people who got psilocybin, all of them said it was one of the most three most profound experiences they've had in their life. It was incredible mystical experience. None of the placebo group had that experience. And the real telling detail is 9 out of the 10 people who got psilocybin ended up becoming priests, and none of the other guys did.
And
so
wow.
That's it, right? So they Rick Doblin, who runs MAPS and is a good friend of mine, comes back about 20 years later, and he does a long-term follow-up. He says, okay, yeah, whatever, maybe. Let's see if it's really legit. Let's see if these guys, like, oh, this thing changed your life. And literally goes back and re-interviews all of them, and they still think, it's one of the most profound experiences they've had in their life, and it totally changed their life. Everybody who took part in it, right? And then Roland Griffith at Johns Hopkins comes back very recently, like 5-6 years ago, reruns the exact same experiment with very rigorous, modern, double-blind protocol, and gets the exact same result.
Wow.
Right, so we've redone to this idea that you can get a genuine spiritual, mystical, whatever you want to call it, experience, and now we can actually quantify the mystical experience. We have much better language to put it around. Like, we know, certain things. We're talking about certain things, and there's biology underneath them, and we know what we're looking at now.
Yeah,
but that's right. We had to redo that study and redo that study and redo that study. And it's a big deal, right? Like, we never redo stuff, and we keep getting the same result, which never happens. So,
Well, this is interesting to me, though, because what is the implication here? That if you take mushrooms within like a church or a sacred space, I'm curious about this experience versus.
Yeah, so all that tells us what you're getting at, right? Which we learn over and over and over and over again. And this is a lot of what we're sort of studying with the guys at Imperial, is that set and setting, right? Your mindset into the experience, and the experience, right? And the experience is critical. And I like the joke I always make of this is I don't go to Burning Man very often. I've been, obviously. But the reason I don't go, one of the main reasons I don't go is like, if you put me in a group of people and they're all on drugs and they're playing with fire, well, I've had this experience and I know what happens next. Next, I have to talk to the police. And after I'm done talking to the police, I have to find a way for everybody not to shoot each other when the guns come out. Because that's my childhood, right?
No.
I go to Burning Man and I bring my set and setting. There's no possible way I'm going to lose myself in experience and merge with the crowd and have, speak to Norse gods or anything. Because I am so crazy because I see people on drugs and fire and I think, fuck, I've been to this party. Next, we shoot each other. And I'm always the guy who has to talk to the cops and keep everybody out of jail.
Man. You got to come next year, Steven. Come camp with us. Come camp with us next year, please. We would love to have you. We'll keep you safe. My camp, the Enchanted Booty Forest, will keep you safe. You have nothing to fear.
You're going to have to surround me with Navy SEALs.
There's SEALs out there, and like an F-14 did a flyover this last year. But I get it, set and setting. But here's the thing, and this is what I know we must disagree on that. Maybe Christianity actually was a mushroom cult. And the reason the Good Friday experiment is so effective is because it's adding a missing component. The missing component in Christianity is the mushroom. So, and I think this is a missing component in a great many religions, is we have left out the psychedelic component to gathering together and having
Look, first of all, the psychedelic component, one of my favorite games to play in the world is I love asking the question, how do religions get assembled? Because they all have a state-changing technology at their heart.
Yes.
Those states, A, they feel very profound. B, they're underpinned by the most addictive feel-good neurochemicals on earth. And if you're going to build a religion, you're going to change culture at a global scale with this idea. Like, the one thing we know about why people believe things is because there's strong neurochemical reactions underneath the belief. And so, like, I love diagnosing religions and going, okay, well, what were they playing with? Now, did Christianity start out as a mushroom cult, or was there some other state-changing technology? Like, that's an open question to me. I have no idea.
Sure.
You've been reading your Terence McKenna, and good for you.
And John Marcus Allegro, too, The Sacred Mushroom and the Cross.
Yes, the mushroom. And I mean, and whether or not you're right or wrong about the mushroom, like, there's a state-changing, there's gotta be. Like, you don't get to change that much culture without addictive neurochemistry.
Yes, that's right. That's right. And that's why, one of my favorite things to do is to get really high and go to a church and go into the ceremony and experience it.
See what we're doing here? We're playing the game that's called Duncan Justifies His Life. I get it. I'm sorry, I was playing a different game. Now I know the game.
No, man, I'm not justifying. I mean, I recommend it to you. Like, forget Burning Man. The next time you find yourself super stoned, don't go see a movie in Hollywood. Go to a Gnostic Christian church. And
I got to tell you an awful story, an awful but a funny story that I've never told out loud before. Okay, so yes, I'm actually going to tell this.
Scoop, yes.
So when I was growing up, I grew up Jewish, right? And I discovered psychedelics in high school, like a lot of people. So we had a rabbi. We only went to temple on the high holidays. And our rabbi, lovely, amazing, wonderful human being that I'm about to tell an awful story about, was getting a little old, and he was getting a little senile.
Yes.
And so his sermons, he would forget where he was occasionally and start over. And so the high holiday services would go on, and so my father, who was a bit of a prankster one year, starts a betting pool in the congregation at what time the rabbi is going to finish his sermon. So, and mind you, 2/3 of the congregation is now in on the bet.
Wow. My father
decides to hedge his bets, so he pays off the cantor who is sitting behind the rabbi. Okay, he pays. She's supposed to stop the rabbi at 12:12, no matter what. So I actually go to temple on acid that particular year.
Yes.
And at 12:12, the rabbi is giving his sermon, and at 12:12, the cantor stands up behind him. Rabbi can't see what's going on, but everybody knows that the bet is on, and that my father put in the fix. Like everybody in the whole synagogue knows the fix is in. She stands up, and the entire congregation bursts into laughter. She sits back down. The rabbi loses his place, starts over, and I'm tripping. And I'm the most because I can see everything I actually know everything that's going on, but at this point I'm experiencing the cosmos at a deep level, and I can see how we created this reality from eons ago.
Yes.
And it was one of the most powerful experiences I've ever had in the middle of like the fix of the con in the religion at this service that I didn't even believe in. It was one of the strangest things ever.
Wow. That's it, man. Yeah, that's it. It's something about taking a psychedelic inside of a thing that's so ancient, and you can see it, and that for me was, that's how.
But let me ask you a question. Are
Sure.
you like, do you have that reaction? Is it just churches, or like if you go into, ancient Mayan ruins or take your pick, like do you have that feeling?
I haven't done it in ancient Mayan ruins yet. I've done it. I've had the experience. I've noticed that when I pair psychedelics with some kind of religion, the two just go together like peanut butter and jelly. And this has happened reading the New Testament on LSD. That's when I what Christianity was really clicked to me. Or getting stoned and going to a Christian church and hearing just the sound of the prayers and realizing, my God, these are so old.
I will tell you, I did a lot of research for my first book, which is called The Anubis Reply, which has a lot of Kabbalah in it.
Yes.
And I did a lot of the research for the Kabbalah parts on acid.
Wow.
The text made a little more sense that way.
Yes.
I was like 21 when I was just starting researching the book, but I couldn't get them. It wasn't making sense to me, to my normal, logical, rational mind. And I found that, if I tipped it, and psychedelics don't impact me the way they impact most people. They don't tilt me as far as they tilt a lot of people. I can read a book and it's not. I get what you're saying, because I've had similar experiences a long time ago.
It's incredible, but I got us a little off track, and but I'm glad I did, because that's an amazing story. I cannot believe your dad was fixing bets.
It was maybe one of the funniest things my father's ever done in his life.
That is brilliant.
It's brilliant. It was brilliant.
But I wanted to talk just for a second. There's by the way, we've gone over by 5 minutes. Do you have a little bit more time?
Yeah, I sure do.
Okay, beautiful. So I wanted to talk a little bit to get back to flow state and this phenomena of synchronicity, and a question that popped into my head. Are you aware of, I think it's called the Noetic Institute out in San Francisco? Do you know who they are? Have you heard of them?
Yeah, they reached out to me. I'm a little familiar with their work. It's sort of like quoting Rupert Sheldrake or Dean Radin. Like, it's not that I'm so glad they do the work they do.
Yes.
My filter for truth, it cannot accommodate it if I'm gonna if it's going in a book called that has my name on it. My filter for truth does not I'll talk.
Okay,
about
hold on. I got to write that down the next time I want to tell somebody they're full of shit. My filter of truth does not accommodate this.
It just doesn't. I mean, I'm a journalist. You know what I mean? Like I always say, like, there was a point I did a story for the Atlantic Monthly once, and not only did the story get fact checked by my editor and the editor in chief and the fact checker and another fact checker, but they convened a panel of experts from like Harvard and Yale and Stanford to weigh in on whether or not they thought the stuff I was writing in the article was true.
Yeah.
Like, if you're going to put something into with your name on it, like, that's my filter for truth, because those are the hoops I'm used to jumping through, and I can't get Rupert Sheldrake through that hoop.
Well, look, I'm going to speak for them, and it's kind of sad that I'm speaking for them, because I'm not a scientist. But I went up there, hung out with them, and they seem to be very, 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 very similar to you in their desire.
Dude, I'm not saying they're not. I'm not. I think they're real people doing real work in the world. Same thing with Rupert Sheldrake. I think claiming it as reality rather than a theory that needs a lot of testing is a little. I'm not super comfortable with that move.
Sure, I got it. But you're aware of the thing they're doing with the random number generators. You know about that?
I am. And I read the book, and the stats are impressive. And then I read all the counter stuff. And the counter stuff says, hey, wait a minute. When you scale up data sets that much, you get random fluctuations in the data that appear as real patterns. And this is, something that we know about in machine learning and AI development. And we cure with algorithms. That's the counter argument to the random number. I'm not saying I don't know enough about the math to say who's right. I really don't. That said, all I know is that what I'm trying to do is change culture at a significant level. I'm interested in playing that game. And if I'm going to play that game, my filter for truth has to be extraordinarily high and very, very, very rigorous. And if a whole ton of people are saying, hey, these guys aren't as rigorous as they should be, well, maybe that's just scientists being assholes because they want to be assholes. Or maybe there's something there and I'm not smart enough to say, but my job is to be as rigorous as I can be. So it does, I don't get to play. I mean, I can play there intellectually, but I don't play there in what I put out in the world.
I would just love for you to rigorously set up an experiment with those random number generators and get them around your best flow state students. And just because my hypothesis would be that you are going to see the same kind of fluctuations, and maybe you could set it up in a more stringent way. But I think if you got a group of people who are adept at going into a flow state and set up some way to measure a field, you're going to get results. I think you're going to find something there, but I don't know. What do I know?
What's interesting, so the science to do what you want to do, we could do it it's a little more complicated, but it could be done. I would like to do it with a physiological, neurological set of metrics for flow rather than a psychological set of metrics. We have well-established psychological metrics for saying you're in flow, you're not in flow.
Yes.
They're very well validated. What we're working on at the Flow Genome Project, and a lot of people are working on, not just us, is a set of physiological metrics, right? So we can know for sure you're in this state. Once we get that, the experiment you're talking about is simple, right? All you need is your flow, whatever you're going to measure flow with, and you need random number generators, and then it's a simple experiment.
Yeah.
Right.
Or maybe what about this one? God, you're so brilliant. Thank you for bearing with me here. But what about this one? To continue the idea of measuring physiological properties, you take a group of people who are in flow state, and now you've come up with a way to quantify what that is. You know for certain they are. And then you put a person in a box, a hermetically sealed box, and you measure what's happening to them physiologically, but you make sure there's no way pheromones are getting in there, sound is getting in there, and you see if the person in the box surrounded by people in flow state, if anything changes, because I think they might go into a flow state and not even know what was happening.
So that's interesting because we know, and this wasn't work we did, this was work, it was done by Advanced Brain Monitoring out of Carlsbad, California, and they did it with DARPA, among other people, the Defense Department Big Think research arm. They know that powerful leaders can entrain their whole teams in flow. And that's, it happens, you can use oratory, but teams get entrained by powerful leaders. So we know the effect is going on. Now, you want to know, is the effect non-local?
Yes.
Right? That's what you're asking, non-local questions. I mean, I'll tell you something on this topic. We do some work with heart math, and they're very interesting. But they also, they've written a lot of papers on intuition, and they're interested in the question of, where does the information come from, right? Where they want the intuition, they want intuition to be you're tapping into something non-local and you're getting these great ideas. And maybe that's the point. Maybe that's what we should be investigating. To me, like, we're literally on the other end of that, doing a study right now on flow and creativity where we're trying to measure. We know creativity gets jacked up in flow, but what is it? Is it idea generation? Is it pattern recognition? So we're going micro on it, trying to figure out more specifically. We know the intuition gets amped up, but what are the practical effects in the real world? I'm really interested in the practical.
Yeah.
I want to know, does it grow corn? I want to know, can I use it to get more flow? Right.
I love it. I want more flow. This is the final question I have for you, and I'm going to take you that digital course you were talking about, because I don't know of anything more ecstatic than the flow state. And I go to these Ram Dass retreats. By the end of them, everyone's in this flow state. You feel like you've taken MDMA. You haven't. You're just tripping somehow on the group's heightened state of consciousness. I don't know what that is, but I love it. So any method that you've developed that could help me get into that more, I'm in, man. But I want to know, for the people listening and for me, without taking the course, can you give us some instruction on some things that we could do today or this week to try to enhance our ability to drop into a flow state? Okay,
so like every other freaking question you've asked me today, there's two answers to that question. Okay? I'm going to give them both to you.
Great.
The first is, whenever people are interested in high performance and they ask me for, hey, can you just 80-20 this and give me like 3 things I can do Monday morning kind of thing?
Yes.
My answer is, one of my answers, I'm going to give you those things. I will.
Great.
But my first answer is, fuck you, man. Are you kidding? Like, seriously, are you fucking
you, man? Kidding? Fuck you.
Like, seriously, let me break, like, here's what we know. What we know for sure is you get one shot at this life.
Yes.
Maybe more, but we know for sure you get one shot at it, and we know for sure you're going to spend a third of it asleep, right? So what you do with the other 2/3, that is really the only freaking question that matters.
Right.
That is all that matters, right? So yeah, I can give you 3 things you can do Monday morning, but it doesn't matter. You have to do them Monday morning and Tuesday morning and Wednesday morning and Thursday morning and Friday morning and Saturday morning, week after week, year after year,
yes,
decade after decade, for a career. That's like, if you're not playing that game, if you're not here to make a dent, you're just taking up space, right? Okay. So it should not be about 3 things you can do Monday morning. I'll tell you what they are, but really, man, this is a lifetime question. It's the game we should be playing.
Got it.
I'm off my soapbox on that one.
Okay.
Here are the 3 things that matter.
And wait, just to clarify, we only need to do this once and we'll be in flow forever?
No.
Okay.
No. Let me walk you through it.
Okay.
What we know is that flow states have triggers. These are preconditions that lead to more flow. And there are about 20 of them. And if I was going to just give you a broad overview, flow, one of the things that creates flow is it can only show up when all of our attention is focused in the right here, the right now, totally in the moment attention, right? So what do these triggers do? They all drive attention to the present moment. They drive the neurobiology of attention into the present moment, right? So the first obvious downstream finding from that idea is, when I work with organizations, I go into the organization, I say, look, guys, if you can't hang a sign on your door that says, fuck off, I'm flowing, you're sunk. You can't play this game. Forget about it. If you're an organization where you got to respond to emails in an hour and messages in 15 minutes, or, if you work for that organization, or if that's how you run your own life, you're a disaster when it comes to high performance, because you need uninterrupted concentration. In fact, what the research shows is that 90 to 120 minute periods are, ideal for flow. And if you're doing something really hard and creative, you should have a couple like 4 or 5 hour periods a week where you can really tune out. And so you need to be able to shut out all distractions and really focus, right? That's,
even with dog, like, and this sounds like I'm asking the dumbest thing, but I know you are right now on a Chihuahua ranch, and you have dogs everywhere. I've got dogs. Even what about that kind of distraction, like just yipping dogs and that kind of background noise? Is that what you mean?
I mean anything that can break your focus out of what you're doing, right?
Wow.
So like, what do? I get up every day at 4 a.m. and I'm down in my office, and my office is the back end of our fields, and maybe I have one or two dogs with me at the time, but it's pitch black. It's 4 a.m. Everything's turned off. My phone's unplugged, which I do the night, like I have a landline. I unplug it the night before. My cell phone's turned off. Email shut down. Social media is turned off. I have no alerts on my computer, and I pull up my book that I'm particularly working on. I put it into focus view, and I have no lights on. So literally the only thing that exists in my world is the page that's in front of me.
Wow.
And I work for 4 hours.
Wow.
That's how I start every day, right? Like that's what I do to protect this, to protect my time for flow. When we train people, what we try to tell them to do is just like start your day with your hardest task, the thing that's going to require the most focus, and try to build up over time to a 90-minute block, right? And some people have lives where they can do this. Some people have bosses where they can't do this at all because their boss isn't open to any other ideas. But what we found is that most people can just have their conversations. If you walk into your boss's office and say, look, I need to do this because it's going to allow me to be 500% more productive for you.
Yes.
Right, people start to pay attention. Right. So, like, I always say, you got to have your conversations around this work. But thing one is, create conditions for incredibly focused attention. Which, I mean, it's obvious, but like, it's really that dumb. The next thing is, and I know we're going over. Do you want me to keep going, or do you want me to do
this is a mate. Please, yeah, this is incredible.
Okay. All right. So the next thing you want to know, and so. You pay the most attention to the present when the challenge of the task at hand slightly exceeds your skill set. In flow language, this is known as the challenge skills balance. It's often called the golden rule of flow, the most important, potent of all flow triggers, right? So if I was going to say this emotionally, what I would say is, Duncan, flow exists not on, but very near the midpoint between anxiety. Whoa, there's way too much stimulation in this situation. I'm freaked out, and boredom. Whoa, there's not enough stimulation. I'm not paying any attention, right?
Yeah.
It's called the flow channel. And for those of you listeners who speak physiology, this is the Erks-Dobson curve, right? But it's the flow channel. And so what is important here is that sweet spot is right outside your comfort zone, right? So for people who are a little shyer, quieter, meeker, less, interested in risk, et cetera, getting to this sweet spot is tricky because you got to push yourself out of your comfort zone, right? The flip side for, hyper type A, get it done, high performer types is that sweet spot is actually maybe 4%, 5% greater than the challenge instead of 10, 20, 30. Like top performers will take on challenges that are, 40, 50 times greater, right? And what they need to do is just a slight challenge, and because what you're trying to do is drive attention. So it's hard on both sides to get it right. But if you're slightly uncomfortable, if you're slightly nervous, that's sort of the somatic address of that sweet spot.
Yes.
You can everybody's got to conduct the experiment because there's genetics underneath some of this stuff. There's a lot of stuff underneath this stuff. You got to run the experiment yourself to figure out what is that exact sweet spot for yourself. But once you can nail it, that's what you want to bring to every task. So let me, again, writing example. So I know for me, when I am writing either fiction or something that is somewhat autobiographical nonfiction, right?
Yeah.
Which is not everything right. But when I'm writing those categories, I am in the sweet spot when I'm telling enough truth, revealing enough about myself that I feel vulnerable and exposed. I don't feel like my career is going to get ended by a hostile takedown by the Inquirer, but I feel vulnerable and exposed, like I'm showing a little more of myself than I really like showing in public.
Yes.
Right? So that's how I know. That's the somatic address for my writing, right? Like when I'm doing this kind of writing, right? But that's what I mean. Like when I say conduct the experiment, I don't mean in a broad way. I mean like figure out the shit you do on a daily basis and conduct the experiment in each of those things. You know what I mean? I've got a specific way. When I ski so I can push that amount. When I lift weights, I lift, when I write fiction, when I do blah, 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 I've done the experiment at every level so I can always find that sweet spot and push the challenge skills balance. And this, this is a bonus because risk is another flow trigger, right? Consequences catch our attention. Could be physical risk, emotional risk, spiritual risk, doesn't matter. As long as you're taking a risk, you're getting dopamine in the system and it's focused.
That is so cool, man. This is so wild.
Okay, so you want one more thing so the next thing I'm going to tell you to do, this is not going to be my third thing, but I'm just going to mention it because it's critical.
Yes.
Get enough sleep. Flow is a high energy state, right? You can get to it exhausted. You really can. There are certain gateways that you can get there, but it's really hard to do when you're exhausted. You kind of need to be eating well and sleeping 7-8 hours a night to regularly get into flow. There's just no other way around it because it requires too much energy.
Right.
Okay?
Got it.
The fun thing, and this is not a flow hack, but I think this is the most important thing, and maybe this is because I'm just a little crazy and neurotic myself, so this is so important to me that I teach it as something that maybe everybody's not wired this way, but I'm going to teach it because I think it's critical. And so we talked about pushing the challenge skills balance up, right? The governor on that experience is going to be fear and anxiety.
Yes.
Because, right, too much norepinephrine or cortisol in the system, which is essentially that's the recipe for anxiety, blocks creativity, blocks flow, does all kinds of nasty things health-wise. It's a bad state to be in. And it's very close to 21st century normal. Like you measure most people's hormonal profiles, you're going to find cortisol and norepinephrine. Because we live, in heightened alert for a lot of neurobiological reasons that I talk about in abundance, as a matter of fact. And we're not going to go into now. But my point is, you got to learn to do this work. Flow is a really high energy state. These are addictive neurochemicals, and you're going to need some level of emotional control, and you're going to have some level of a working agreement with fear. You're going to have a way to run negotiations with fear. You're going to have a mindfulness breath work kind of practice because that gives you a little distance from your emotions, perhaps. You're going to have to use technologies like the Muse headset or the HeartMath M-Wave stuff, like whatever your methodology for kind of calming yourself the fuck down a little bit. You're going to have to get good at this stuff. You're going to need that along the way. And the more you can do it, the more you can accomplish in this world. So to me, you have to have, because the best among us, right? Like Duncan, if I've done one thing, I've written books all over the place, but what's the center of the work I've done is for 30 years I've asked the question, what does it take to do the impossible? When people pull off shit that we never thought we were going to see, whether it's turning science fiction ideas into science fact technology or human performance stuff, people doing things physically that we never ever thought were going to happen, right? How does that happen? What's underneath all of that stuff? Right. And underneath all these people who've done that kind of work, they all use fear as a compass. They steer by it, right? Like when faced with a decision, oftentimes they'll be like, okay, what scares me the most? I'm going there because I know on the other side of fear is everything I want. Like it's a directional to these people.
Wow.
But to use it as a directional, and I got to tell you something. I think in your field as a comic, I think if you talk to any of the top comics, anybody you want to pick, they've used fear as a directional. Where is your best material? Well, what is the worst, rawest, craziest shit that ever happened to you? And how do I tell that story in public? Right? Like go use fear as a directional for your art.
No, you know when you've hit a good bit, a good thing to do, whatever it is, you know it because you're terrified to bring it on stage. And that's it. It's the gateway.
Right? Absolutely. So everybody who's ever done anything great in the world, and you want to hear this is my favorite story about this. Do you have time for a wild ass story? All right. This is I'm avoiding a business call that I have to make as soon as we hang up. I gotta go into a business call, but it's great. I can put it off because I'm doing good work in the world. So I got a chance. It was a cover story for Wired magazine. I was in the room when the world's first artificial vision implant was turned on. So the very first time we created a cyborg, a blind man, a guy who'd been blind for 20 years. They put a brain implant in his head and they turned it on and he could see. Now, the guy who did this was this crazy maverick inventor named William DeBell. The whole thing was almost completely illegal. He had to do the surgeries in Portugal. I was in his lab in Long Island. He's passed away, so I can tell this story. But literally, like, he would have gone to jail. So they turn this thing on, and they're testing it, and it's like it's so a phosphene is a point of light, and they're tuning the algorithm, and they're starting really slowly. So the blind guy there's a camera that is literally picking up feedback, and he's got computer jacks sunk into the side of his skull. Go to like Wired magazine, the story is called Vision Quest. You can see the photos.
Wow.
He's got computer jacks going into the side of his skull. Like, it is literally like 80s science fiction in reality. So anyways, as like it's working, the frickin' experiment is working. Like, literally, they've got a blind guy he can see, and it's 1 phosphane to 2 phosphanes to 5 to like the outline of shapes. And they're so excited, they let the patient take over the keyboard. They've been these 2 techs who have been like kind of running the experiment the whole time. And DeBell, the mad scientist who's running the whole thing, is in a wheelchair. He's diabetic. He's an amputee. He's in a wheelchair. So in the room are these 2 just out of college kids, me, the blind guy, and the doctor's in a wheelchair.
Wow.
And nobody's paid attention. Suddenly the guy is stimulating himself, and he's going too fast. And his name is Jens, has a grand mal seizure. Eyes roll. The doctor is sitting next to him. He doesn't see it. The techs are kids. They've never seen a seizure before. They've got no. So I run over, and I've got this guy in my arms. His head is thrashing so much I've got a black eye. Like, he literally gave me a black eye, nearly broke my nose.
Shit.
And all I'm thinking to myself is, well, I'm actually thinking 2 things. I'm thinking, 1, holy shit, this guy's going to die in my arms. And 2, holy shit, I got the story of a lifetime.
Yeah.
Right? But ignore the narcissistic mercenary journalist instincts. Anyways, he didn't end up dying, and he ended up living. And actually, a couple days later, he was driving he could see so well, he was driving a car around a crowded parking lot.
Wow.
So it was a miracle. But here's the day after that happened, I asked DeBell about it. Right? I was like, holy fuck, man, that guy almost died in my arms. What the hell kind of madness is this? And he looks at me. He's like, so I want to tell you the story I live my life by. And I was like, okay. He said, do you know the story of William Selfridge? I said, no, I don't know who William Selfridge is. William Selfridge was a Navy captain. The Wright brothers built their airplane, and they don't have any money. So they got to sell the thing to the Navy. And the Navy sends out a guy named William Selfridge to test the flight out. And Orville or Wilbur, I think it's Wilbur, takes him up for a ride. The plane crashes, and Selfridge dies. They kill him.
Jesus.
Right? He dies. And they still go on to perfect their design and, change transportation forever forward. And DeBell's point to me is, man, if you're going to break an omelet, you're going to break some eggs.
Yeah.
Right? And the other thing, like, I learned at that particular moment, by the way, is that I saw it in action sports. I've seen it everywhere. Like, if you're going to push the cutting edge, people are going to die. That's the cost.
Wow.
There's no that's the cost. Right? Like, people talk to me all the time about action sport athletes. They're pushing the bounds of physical possibility for our species, and they're dying in droves. And I always, like, are you surprised? I mean, are you kidding me? They're pushing the bounds of the species. They're rewriting the history books on what humans can do. You don't think we're going to die along the way?
Wow.
Right? Like, that was his point. So my point on all this is, like, not only do, like, the best that I've ever met use fear as a compass, they also have a very, 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 very different idea of the actual costs involved in the work, which is interesting. I'm not telling you it's the 3 things you should do Monday morning. I'm telling you should negotiate with fear so you can use it as a compass. But I am telling you that when you look at this at the upper end, the people who are turning science fiction fact into science, or science fiction into science fact, yeah, that's how they're thinking about the problem.
It's amazing. That's beautiful. It's so true. Wow.
Stupid to think otherwise, right? I mean, like, it's hubris. It's when people ask me that question, what I wonder honestly is, because they're always saying the action sport athletes are so selfish. They have families, they have whatever, and I'm like, well, That's one way of looking at it. The other way of looking at it is, oh my God, they're incredibly unselfish. They're willing to risk their life for the advancement of the species. That's pretty freaking amazing if you ask me.
Yeah.
And it's arrogant of you to think that we could advance the species without risking our lives.
Right.
Right? Like, I mean, I'm not saying it's easy or fun or any of those things, but I am saying, like, of course the cost is everything. It has to be. What are we talking about?
And look, you know, if it works in the extremes like that globally, certainly personally, if you want to push yourself, you might have to risk maybe not dying, but losing everything, right? That's kind of what you're saying.
Duncan, let me ask you a question. Is not one of the reasons you like smoking pot is because it downregulates fear? And so you can get at ideas and parts of yourself and all kinds of stuff that and execute plans in the world that would be too scary under other conditions?
Yeah, you know what? I would say this is why I like more of the psychedelics, which are a little more gentle with me. Marijuana, it does not downregulate fear for me. It freaks me the fuck out.
Duncan, you want me to fix that?
Yes.
I'll fix it. You'll never have that problem again. I'll fix that for you right now.
Oh my God, this is the greatest podcast of my life.
Going to take about 3 minutes, but here, okay. So first of all, you're probably smoking some sativas more than indicas, but at the front end of any marijuana high, but really true with sativas, you get a big push of dopamine, right?
Yes.
And dopamine, it feels great, but it amplifies pattern recognition. Okay.
Yes.
You read Abundance, and we talked a second ago about, hey, the brain takes in 400 billion bits of information a second.
Yes.
Right? So the biggest problem the brain's got to solve is, oh my God, I got a shit ton of information. I got to sort this. What's critical? What's important? Well, the first order of business for any species is survival. So where does that shit go first? It all goes to the amygdala, your danger detector, right? And this is why most people, and this is work done at Berkeley, most people take in about 6 to 9 bits of negative information for every 1 bit of positive information they take in. Okay, this is just normal conditions. That's what the filter does, right? The fact that we're, that's what the amygdala does under normal conditions. So one of the reasons, by the way, you want to negotiate with fear is so you can stop taking in so many things, because we no longer live in an environment where everything can kill you, right? You need it that heightened. So like that's part of the negotiation with fear. That's critical. But here's the problem. When you smoke a shit ton of pot, you get more data per second, right, because of the dopamine, and you get more pattern recognition. Unfortunately, your filter is still going to find 9 negative things to panic about and spiral off to every one positive. But here's the cool part. Dopamine only peaks for about 20 minutes. So from the time you smoke pot and that paranoia starts to come on, what you got to say to yourself is, oh, look at this. It's heightened dopamine. I'm starting to really pay attention to all the negative stuff. If you allow that negative thought to connect to another negative thought, to connect to another, once the emotion gets into the system, once the fear is in the system, you're fucked. You can't get out of it.
Right.
Because the dopamine, right, it's too strong. You'll never win. But you can say to yourself, oh, wow, massively heightened pattern recognition, really amplified stuff. So for the next 20 minutes, I'm going to only pay attention to the positive thing. So when the negative thing comes up, you go, all right, I see that, and that's important, and thank you for telling me about that, but I'm going to pay attention to that like 20 minutes from now. I'm not going to disregard it, because that would be bad. Thank you for telling me. I'm going to pay attention to that in about 20 minutes after I have less dopamine in my system, so I don't panic, so I can actually lend it. You have a negotiation with yourself based on facts and honest to God. And just train yourself for that period to pay attention to the positive, and just like when the positive comes up, you look for it. What is the positive in the negative? Hunt for it. And then how does it link to another positive?
Wow.
And all you got, and it will take if you do that for a month to 2 months, you're going to rewire your brain. Your brain's going to stop hunting for the negative, because marijuana, one of the things it's phenomenal for, and this is not my research, this is Mitch Earlywine's when he was at USC before he went to the University of Kentucky. It's phenomenal for state-dependent learning, right? So people make the mistake. They think marijuana is really good for sitting on the couch and watching funny cat videos and eating Cheetos.
Yes.
Because that's what they first did when they were stoned. But what you first did when you were stoned is you used that to create great music and you trained yourself to do that, it would never dawn on you that this was actually good for eating Cheetos on the couch. Right? State-dependent learning. So if you reprogram kind of the front end of the marijuana experience this way, spend a couple months doing it, just paying attention, practicing, you won't have this problem again.
Wow. Oh my God. I'm sorry to say it, I think you changed my life in this podcast, Stephen. That was amazing. Holy shit. This work that you're doing is so incredible. Wow.
Remember when I said earlier that with altered states, with flow, with these things, like you have to be adult about it?
Yes.
That's what I mean. Like all of these states, like marijuana, it's great for creativity, product. It can be great for those things, but you don't just get to get stoned and think it's going to happen to you. Same thing with acid, right? You got to take psychedelics and go to church to get at, right? Like this is not, dude, I'm going to get stoned at a party or I'm going to, like, that's not what we're talking about. You're talking about using a technology for very practical purposes in adult fashion, right? Yep. That's the great discussion. That's the fact that we can have this discussion out loud in public and other people are actually interested in it, might want to have this discussion themselves. That's cool. That's different.
Yes, it is. Stephen, I cannot thank you enough for giving me so much of your time. This has been a mind-blowing episode. How do people find you?
Duncan, it's been a lot of fun. Thank you for being such a fun host and taking the conversation to so many great places. And thank you for the stuff you talk about out loud.
Thanks, really Steve. Hey,
it's great. It's great. I love it when people are having the discussion in some level of rational fashion, right? With humor also. Like, then I'm happy. I'm psyched. So I just want to let you know that I appreciate what you do in the world. You can find me at StephenKotler.com, or you can find me at the Flow Genome Project.com. And one thing I want to tell your listeners really quickly, because it'll help, if you go to the flowgenomeproject.com, there's a free flow diagnostic. It's a flow profile. It's one of the largest studies ever run in optimal psych, but it basically says, hey, if you're this kind of person, you want more flow in your life, look in these directions. It's basically, the 20 triggers are underneath this diagnostic. It's a little easier to take, but anybody can use it. It's free, and it'll help you get a little more flow in your life.
Oh, I'm headed there right now. Man, thank you so much. You are amazing. Thanks, Stephen.
My pleasure, Duncan.
Much thanks to Stephen Kotler for appearing on the show. Thank you, HelloFresh, for sponsoring this episode. Remember, go to HelloFresh.com and use Duncan30 to get $30 off your first week of delicious HelloFresh food. Patreon.com/DTFH. Subscribe. Go to our shop. Give us a nice rating on iTunes. And most importantly, have an amazing week. I hope this helps you.